Before we start the podcast, I just want to say thank you very much to everybody who's been supporting Popular Front. Really appreciate it. It's been going 6 months now. I started it in March. And to be honest, I thought it might be a flop, but I thought, you know what, let me just try it anyway. And it seems to be going really well. So thanks very much. Everybody keep sharing it, keep telling people about it. And if you have time, please review it on iTunes. That would be really useful. Ta. This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the very niche and kind of geeky details of modern warfare with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to Gregory Waters. He's going to be talking about the Tiger Forces in Syria. The Tiger Forces are the most popular pro-Assad regime militia. In the areas that they control, they're seen as heroes, and to everybody else, they're seen as war criminals. Gregory is going to tell us how the Tiger Forces rose to become such a prominent militia and how they're working alongside the Russian military on the front lines in Syria. To support Popular Front, go to patreon.com/popularfront and please do subscribe to our YouTube because we're doing docs now too. That's youtube.com/popularfront. This episode is sponsored by thedefensepost.com. In the context of the Syrian civil war, who are the Tiger Forces?
Right, so the Tiger Forces, they've evolved over time, but they're really, at their core, it's an air intelligence supported, funded, and run pro-government militia. That air intelligence link has always been there, and it really remains the core of who they are. Their founder and commander is a man called Suhail al-Hassan. Started out as a colonel in the Special Operations Department of the Syria's Air Intelligence. He's now a brigadier general. Their overall commander, the guy that Suhail reports to directly, is the Major General Jamil al-Hassan, the commander of the entire Air Intelligence Directorate. But the Tiger Forces themselves have been a kind of conglomeration of air intelligence, special operations fighters, minority, Alawite and Christian volunteers, the remnants of former SAA, which is the Syrian Arab Army, special forces, divisions and brigades. And in the last couple of years, it's really become this amalgamation of local, essentially warlords, strongmen from all the Alawite villages in Hama, Homs, Latakia, and Tartus.
So it's a pro-government, it's a pro-Assad militia. But how is it different to the others? Because there are quite a lot of pro-Assad militias. You got the NDF, you've got the SSMP. Why are the Tiger Forces different?
Right, so the Tiger Forces are different because of this air intelligence origins. The air intelligence, there's, I believe, 4 intelligence directorates in Syria. The Mukhabarat, right, is what we know them as. Yeah,
that's like the secret police type.
Exactly, and the air intelligence is the strongest of all of them. That came about under Hafez. From his origins in the Air Force, he kind of brought them into prominence, and they became the most favored directorate. So they've always had the most funding, the most support, the most leeway kind of to do what they want. So when the war started, Suhail, being in charge of the Air Intel's special operations, he was sent around to different protests to put them down, brutally. They did the same thing with the Republican Guard and 4th Division units and the other special forces divisions from the SAA, right? These are the core, majority Alawite run, the core of the military. So they would detach them alongside the Sunni conscripts to make sure that they would fire on protesters, they wouldn't defect. So Suhail was sent around to do that, and for 2011 and 2012, that kind of became how he started building these forces and building this reputation for himself as being a really ruthless supporter of Assad and of Damascus. When he moved to Hama in 2012 to deal with the protests there, he started consolidating all of the military units in the region around himself, which meant that he took control of the Air Force, and that was based out of the Hama military air base. And he took control of a lot of the 4th Division's and SAA artillery units in Hama. And again, he was able to do this because he had the backing and support of the Air Intelligence, which was the most powerful intelligence unit in the country. So what sets him apart is that he has control over not just soldiers on the ground, but over artillery, armor, and air. And really, he's the only person, only commander on the ground in Syria who can call on, the Air Force to help him in any offensive.
What I don't get here is, how are the Tiger forces a pro-government paramilitary or militia? It just sounds like they are another wing of the military.
Right, so what makes them more of a paramilitary militia is that they've expanded far beyond their original core of just thrown together SAA, Special Forces, Air Intel units. They're really now especially focused on, based around strongmen. So if we look at the structure of the Tiger forces before 2014, 2015 is pretty hard to really nail down. My research has just been on the post-2015 stuff because that's what I've been able to find. And if you look at what their structure is now, it's 24 groups. Each one has a regional focus, and they're almost always based around a prominent family. So a lot of these groups were founded and continue to be run by like a set of brothers. So in Talkalak, you have the Cheetah's forces, which were founded by an Al-Haji, a guy whose last name was Al-Haji. He died, and two of their three subsequent commanders have all been his brothers. So you can see that in a lot of these groups. The Shaheen groups from Masyaf area, they're founded and run by two brothers named Soliman and Yusuf Shaheen. They employed a lot of their other relatives as field commanders within their group. So that's what makes this more not just a government military unit, but the paramilitary aspect comes into it when, as the deaths mounted, right, they reached out and just kind of consolidated that Alawite militia control throughout the coastal regions.
So it's basically a militia made up of warlords, and each unit or cell kind of coincides with a different family that, at the head, the warlord controls each unit, right?
Exactly. And a lot of, to be clear, a lot of the commanders and field commanders historically were employed by the air intelligence, so it's not, there's a lot of historical ties to these families. And that's part of one reason why they're powerful is because, they've for years and decades probably been members of the air intelligence.
Right, and you said they're powerful. How powerful are they? Maybe you can give us an idea how many fighters that they have, what kind of equipment.
Right. So these are rough estimates based on building up from the ground up. This unit estimate. So there's 24 groups. Each group has subgroups, which appear to be kind of standardized around a platoon size. So some of them are about 15 men, which is like a section. Most are in the 30s, low 40s, so it's a standard full strength platoon. So building from there, if we say that each subgroup is approximately a platoon, and how many subgroups each of these groups have, you have about 2 brigades full. That's the full strength of the offensive units of the Tiger forces. So to break that all down, you have about 4,000 infantry that are going around for most offensives. But at the same time, you also have flex units from these regions that remain at home. So you've got your, maybe you have a group that has, throwing a number out there, 500 fighters. 250 of these guys will be on deployment with Suhail and the Tiger forces permanently, and 250 will be hanging out in North Hama, guarding the front lines there on defensive duty, but they could be called upon if it needed to be. So we'll say the Tiger forces are 4,000 offensive units. On top of that, they also have artillery and armored units. It's really hard to nail down the size of those. They have at least one artillery regiment, which is about 45 guns. Some sources from 2016, 2015 say that put them at 3 artillery regiments, which is about 130, 120 guns. And the armor unit, I have no idea how big it is. It's really hard to find information on that.
That's a lot of fighters, 4,000. Where are they getting equipment? Where are they getting their weapons from? Like you said, okay, they are reliant to the government, but they are actually still a militia. Where are they getting all their equipment?
It varies. It's, for the more core units, the bigger units, it comes from government funding, air intelligence funding. but a lot of it's personal funding too. So a lot of the smaller units, there's like maybe half of them I would say are several companies to battalion size, but a lot of these are just like a couple platoons thrown together, and these are just local guys. So it's one guy from his town, he's got some money. They created a militia probably years ago, and then as they were seeking out a strong person to back them, they went to the Air Intel, and the Air Intel probably pays their salaries now. So there's that level of affiliation is kind of loose. And we can get more into that later, where you see a lot of dual affiliations for these militias, these subgroups and groups.
So Hale, the guy with the kind of ridiculously penciled in, smooth beard, and he's always kind of hanging around with young lads, and they kind of idolize him. Like, who is he? Why is he so idolized?
He's the colonel that put down a bunch of the protesters and massacred people in Dara and Damascus and Hama. He's Alawite. His prominence among the Hama and Homs Alawite communities really stems from his recruitment of these guys. So it's interesting when you look at these Facebook pages. To a point, he's almost, when we look just at pictures, he's almost more idolized than Assad in some of these communities, just because he's it's a cult of personality around him. He's seen really, and this propaganda is just really pushed that he is the only commander in the Syrian side, government side, that has been able to stop the rebels and defeat them, which is a debatable point, But he's a really good morale booster when he's around.
He's such an odd guy. For any listeners, you have to check this guy out. Like all of his pictures look like, I don't know, like he's in Miami Vice, but in Syria. Like, it's so unusual. Like, it's just very, I don't know. I can't put my finger on it, but it's very odd. All these pictures he's in. And why has he been so useful? Why has he been the only commander to put these protesters down? Is it because he's so vicious, so brutal?
Yeah, well, early, 2011, 2012, it was, he's a brutal person, killing everybody, and you have a lot of disjointed, just literally locals with guns. So it's not very impressive when you go put down a small FSA unit in a little town in rural Idlib. That doesn't mean that you're an elite unit. Again, it comes back to two factors really. It's the size of the Tiger forces. 4,000, two full strength brigades with united logistical units is unheard of basically in this war. The fact that you can keep supplying and arming 4,000 fighters that are semi-centralized command structure is a huge part of his success. But really what it comes down to is his access to the air force and artillery. And so before the Russian intervention, he basically could call on the Air Force at will. That really, really helped in his success in Kanasir in 2013, I believe it was. Which was, opening up the Aleppo-Hama highway. But then once the Russian intervention occurred in September 2015, almost immediately the Tiger forces essentially became the partner force for the Russians. Just as the U.S. uses the SDF in the East, the Tiger forces can be seen in very similar fashion.
How come? Why do they choose them?
I don't know why they chose them. I've been talking to some other people about this for a while. It could be that they bought into the propaganda going on at that time, and they said, this guy is really good, he'll be our partner. It could be that they just saw an opportunity here, as this was a pretty united force that didn't have a foreign backer at the time, right? Because you already had Iran and Hezbollah. They were backing all sorts of different units. So really, what's left to back? As you coming in as a foreign country, Republican Guard, SAA, Tiger Forces. You can't really start doing the Republican Guard, so we'll go to the Tiger Forces then.
Right, it's like the best of a bad bunch for the Russians.
Exactly, and you see this in the pictures. You see Russian commanders, you see Russian Special Forces soldiers. They're pictured from everyone from Suhail all the way down to like random field commanders. The level of integration is pretty sophisticated from what I've seen. Just from looking at pictures of Russians that get pictured alongside Tiger Force fighters.
Right, so the Tiger Forces and the Russians that are there in Syria pretty much, blending in with each other, hand in hand, similar operations.
Exactly.
With that in mind, we should probably talk about your work you've been doing on the Tiger Forces, because I read your piece, about the war crimes of the Tiger Forces. Maybe you can tell us about that.
The Tiger Forces are they're a majority Alawite with militia, some Christians, some Ismaili Shias, and a couple small Sunni subgroups. So the sectarian nature of their fighting is very evident in their posts and the things they do. So in my research, I came across a lot of posts that these fighters and commanders, pictures they would post on their personal pages, Facebook pages, of themselves with decapitated heads or executing prisoners. It's a the war crimes committed by government soldiers are extremely common, but for some reason far less reported on, it seems, in the media than war crimes committed by rebel groups. I don't know if that's a factor of rebel groups just really not trying to keep it private when they do these things, or what, but yeah, so one of the, I was really looking at this one group called the Cheetahs groups, and a pretty big point in their time during the Aleppo offensive, and was on their commander's page. The commander who later died, but Suleiman al-Hayyak, was the commander during the Aleppo offensive in 2016, and he had some pictures of himself right at the end of the battle. He and a couple other Cheetahs guys were standing over for prisoners, and then the next picture shows all the prisoners bent over on the ground with some blood on the ground in what appears to have been a field execution. And what's part of the research I'm doing is, okay, we see this, that execution happened on this date. A couple weeks before, he's pictured alongside Jamil al-Hassan, and a couple weeks after, he's pictured alongside Sohail al-Hassan. So kind of building in that command structure, we can say, well, if this person committed a war crime, how closely tied are his actions to Sohail and Jamil's actions, orders.
There are photos where they're holding up heads as well, right? Like literally, they've beheaded people.
Yeah, that's extremely common.
It's a threatening thing. Like, yeah, we're not hiding this. This is what we do.
Yeah, I think that's just part of the barbarity of this war. All sides are doing this, and they're all very proud of it. I would say everybody, but there are aspects, there are contingents of all sides that are proud of this and have done this. So I think it's important to show that the people that the international community has essentially decided to back, whether through action or inaction, we can debate how much they're better or worse than the opposition in terms of morals.
And there seems to be a real, I know we touched on this cult of personality earlier, but maybe we can talk a bit more about this kind of adoration for the Tiger Forces, because I have seen, pro-regime people just absolutely head over heels defending the Tiger Forces no matter what. Where does that come from?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. You have to get into psychology of the pro-regime media people. I think part of it is that, they are successful. They're successful on the battlefield. It's misattributed to them to Sohail being this amazing commander and them being amazing fighters, when in reality, like I said before, it's the size, the cohesion, logistical support, and really the Russian support to them. So that's a big part of it. It's just a morale booster. It's propaganda. We say, Sohail's coming to this front. That means that the rebels are going to lose. So if Sohail's moving here in a couple months, the battle's over. It's just the big, it's really, that's what it comes down to.
There's almost like a mysticism around him.
Exactly. And it's really strange when we get into, why Sohail? Well, he has 4 pretty important commanders around him, are called his officer corps. And from everything I can tell, they do most of the commanding. He's got a guy whose title is literally military operations commander. And then he has a guy who's in charge of the artillery. He's an engineering, graduated from the engineer officer school, and he's the Tiger's Fire. That's his name, his nickname. And he runs all the artillery operations. So There is definitely a lot of debate about whether or not Suhail is just a figurehead and how much he actually commands or doesn't command anymore.
Like we said, because of this kind of adoration he has, it kind of doesn't matter, right? He is the Tiger Forces are him, sort of thing. And why are they called the Tiger Forces?
His nickname is the Tiger, so it's his forces.
Oh my gosh. He looks like he's had about 10 facelifts. Like, he's a very odd looking guy.
So he has. If you look at his stuff before 2015, he looks like, your regular old Syrian general or commander, but then he got wounded pretty badly during the 2015 Idlib offensive, and afterwards when he came out of that, he definitely had a lot of plastic surgery done to his face. That's why he looks really weird now.
Ah, okay. And who are the Tiger Forces working alongside? Because, you mentioned earlier, and I said as well, the NDF are out there. You have like Hezbollah running around here, there and everywhere in Syria on behalf of Assad, SSMP. Who are the Tiger Forces working with other than the Russians?
So it varies, and that's where it comes down to these strange dual affiliations that some of the groups have within the Tiger Forces. So you have a couple groups that were affiliated with and held some affiliation still to the Desert Hawks, which was I don't know if you're familiar with them. They were a pretty prominent private militia founded by two businessmen from the coast, and it was the Desert Hawks and the Tiger Forces that in 2013, 14, and 15 were really those were the go-to elite government units. They fought alongside each other for a long time. A lot of the Tiger Forces units kind of started out in the Desert Hawks and then moved over to the Tiger Forces in 2015. But sometimes you would still see them fighting alongside the Desert Hawks in later offensives. You also have groups fighting alongside the 4th Division. So ones I found were the Ali Shali Hawks and the Komit Forces. Both of them, either the commanders came from the 4th Division, or they are sometimes referred to as members of the 4th Division still to this day, and they'll fight alongside them.
And the 4th Division being, regime forces, right?
Yes, that's the semi-official, semi-detached SAA unit that's run by Maher al-Assad, Bashar's brother, who is also known for really brutal crackdowns in the early years of the war. It's the main armored division of the SAA. And then, as you mentioned, the SSMP, they actually have at least two groups that have subgroups that claim affiliations to the SSMP. So they'll say, we are SSMP fighters, but we're also Tiger Force fighters. And they'll fight alongside other SSMP fighters in certain battlefields, which is really interesting. I'm not sure if that means that they're getting paid by both, or if it's just that they were SSMP and then they started getting paid by Air Intel. The depth of these affiliations is not clear to me, but it's just,
So they kind of work with anybody really who's in their vicinity.
Yeah, and when they go out, when you have these massive offensives where a lot of units are cobbled together, they'll be fighting alongside whether it's SAA or Hezbollah. There's one group that's fought alongside Hezbollah a couple times, which is interesting. They don't go with the main Tiger Forces units. They when the Tiger Forces were up in East Aleppo and Raqqa, this group was in eastern Damascus fighting with Hezbollah in the desert against ISIS. Same thing, they were fighting with Hezbollah in Suwaida over the last month instead of being deployed up to Idlib.
Right, why is that? Because they're pretty well armed, they're a big unit, they've got a lot of adoration. Why would they be fighting in these kind of backwater areas instead of the main battles?
I think that just comes down to the decentralized aspect of it. You have that core that's going to go with Suhail, but you also have these other semi-official, maybe semi-not official groups that, for whatever reason, they were told to go to this place by somebody else, or they chose to go there. It's not clear why, but it indicates that there's a level of decentralization here.
Well, maybe we can talk a little bit more about the connection between the Tiger Forces and the command structure within the regime, because we know who's running things on the ground, Suhail with the command structure, but there's got to be a lot of back and forth between the government and the Tiger Forces. There must be some kind of control that the government has on them.
Yeah, I think that control certainly comes through Major General Jamil al-Hassan, right, the commander of the entire Air Intelligence Directorate. I think a lot of it came through him, but I also think a lot, since the Russian intervention, it's Russian generals who are kind of running the planning now for any major offensive, which for the most part, Tiger forces will only be involved in major offensives, again, because that's where the Russians are going. So I think you've got some coming down through Jamil Hassan, but a lot of it is being coordinated by the Russian generals. But you also have a former SAA general, brigadier general, who's one of the core officers in the Tiger forces. I'm trying to remember what division he came from. It was one of the Damascus divisions, but he's referred to as the military liaison. So I think a lot of the coordination that happened earlier in the war kind of came through his end as well. It seems like what he was doing was more, he understood the SAA structure and he was familiar with a lot of the SAA commanders, and so he would help coordinate offensives with the SAA units that were being deployed there as well. So it comes from every direction, really. But I think that you could say that if you wanted to sum it up with one group right now, it's the Russian command structure that's kind of running where they go and what happens. Like even 2016 Aleppo, I was looking at all the pictures of the commanders from different units that were meeting with each other during the offensive. Only two guys were pictured meeting with the Russian general in charge of the offensive that I found. And that was the Ziad Saleh, who is the deputy commander of the entire Republican Guard and was placed in command of the entire Aleppo operation, and Suhail. Those are the only two guys who got to meet with him, both at the same time. So, yeah, it's definitely. Like I said, the Russian integration into Tiger Force is very, very strong, especially at the command level.
What kind of people are joining the Tiger Forces? Like, how does a young lad in Syria join the Tiger Forces? It's not as simple as just, I'm in the village, I've got a gun, I want to be a part of it. They're a lot more controlled than that, right?
I think it used to be more controlled than that. It definitely appears now that it's pretty much just my village fights for the Tiger Forces, and especially in the Hama and Homs villages and towns. Like these your men basically only fight for the Tiger Forces at this point. The reason I say this is because I don't know if you saw my other article on child fighters. Like the age of Tiger Force soldiers is incredibly low. Most of them appear to be in their teens, whether that's under 18 or above 18. They're all very, very young. These not like I think a common thing that's said is, Suhail goes to all of these special forces training camps and he personally picks the best fighters to join the Tiger Forces. That's absolutely not true. Maybe he pulls some from there, but a lot of these guys are just kids being recruited from their homes because they need money and there's no jobs.
I do remember actually. I didn't see that article about the child soldiers, but I have seen photos of like martyrs, like young lads that have died within the Tiger Forces, and they're like, this guy is 19. It's like, no, that guy is not 19. You know what I mean? Yeah. So maybe you can talk about that. Why are young kids being joined up to the Tiger Forces? I
mean, it's why does anyone in Syria join up? There's no economy. There's no jobs. Fighting is the source of income for a lot of these families. Like whether you're talking about opposition families or government families, fighting is the one way for them to make money. So it's a combination of you need money, and when you get to somewhat like the northern Hama front line, is more maybe an existential issue of my town's on the front lines with the rebels, and so I need to join up to defend my town. And when you go look to where to join up, everyone in my town fights for the air intel and for the Tiger Forces. The most prominent family in my town, they run a group within the air intel, so I'll just join them.
Right, and how much money they're getting paid? Do you know?
I have no idea, unfortunately.
Okay, do you think it's a lot?
It would definitely be on the higher end of what fighters get paid in Syria, I'd imagine.
Right, it's going to be more than like rebels, I imagine, because I can't imagine they've got much money left.
Yeah.
How are you tracking the goings-on of the Tiger Forces? Because I know you keep referring to like their Facebook pages, and I've certainly seen a lot of I don't know, the Tiger Forces guys seem to be very social media savvy. They seem to be very vain, you know, in one way. Is that the main way you're doing it, through open source?
Yep, it's all through Facebook, and it's all just through publicly available Facebook stuff. I don't friend any of them or interact with any of them. So the project started with I wanted to map out the unit structure of the Tiger Forces, and I just started searching in Arabic on Facebook the different names of the groups that I did know about, and then groups that had been talked about in English, and then I was just looking for other groups. And you'll find, you know, almost all of them have have at least one group page on Facebook, like, you know, any sort of group page, and it'll be about them, and they'll post pictures on it, post updates on like what their group's doing, and then you'll find the commanders' personal Facebook pages, and a lot of them are very public, and they're constantly posting about everything that they're up to, and put pictures of where they're at and all the guys they're fighting with. And then you'll find lots of fighters who are, you know, you'll find posts with like 60 people tagged. Oh, okay, that's the entire subgroup. That's the platoon right there. You know, it's a picture of like 50 guys, and 50 guys are tagged in it. So yeah, I've been doing this for the Syrian Arab Army structure, the Republican Guard structure, and now for Tiger Force structure. And the Tiger Forces are by far the most open about everything that they do on Facebook.
Do you think that's because they're just, I don't know, they don't care, or they're not wise enough to kind of keep it under wraps? Or do you think they're kind of, you know, it's kind of trendy? It's the Tiger Forces. It's almost like the in thing. Exactly.
It's so cool to be a member of the Tiger Forces. You'll see if a guy was even pictured in like the vicinity of Suhail, that's his profile picture. Even if it's 4 years old, that's his profile picture. And he won't change it because he's a Tiger Forces member. You know,
it's a really weird world we live in, where I don't know, you know, you can just find out all this information purely because everybody is kind of involved in this oversharing on social media. Even militants, you know, even guys fighting in Syria.
Exactly. I mean, and it's the positive and this is, you know, negatives of Facebook is that you can do any project you want on Facebook, and you'll be able to find the stuff you need. But it's because they don't really regulate what's on their site. So, like, I mean, just as a side note, my last big project was tracking ISIS fighters on Facebook, and it's incredibly easy to find ISIS supporters. I mean, we mapped out 1,000 of them from their friends lists, and Facebook just does not take this stuff down.
Yeah, I'm in a weird kind of opinion about that. I'm different to a lot of people. A lot of people are like, oh, this guy's ISIS, get him down, and stuff like that. And on Twitter, everybody's reporting each other. I don't agree with that. I don't see the point, because it makes it a lot harder to track. I myself have never once reported anyone ever on any social media platform, just because it's like, well, how am I going to keep track of this person? You know, you find this person, wow, there you go. You know, I was doing some work recently kind of tracking these militant Nazis, and there were other reporters who were doing it as well, and immediately snitching on them, you know, straight away. And I was just like, this is stupid. Now God knows where they've gone. You know, God knows what their new nickname will be. Now you've kind of lost it. So I don't know. I'm sure there's 1,000 people who like laugh in my face for saying that, but you know what I mean. Imagine if all of these pages were taken down, it would make your work, which I think is very important work, it would make it a lot harder.
Oh, of course, yeah. And there has to be like a balance between who do you report and who do you not. I mean, I was of the exact same opinion until I did the ISIS research, and then I was like, that. You know, the law enforcement agencies that are relying on these pages being up, and Facebook trying to use the publicness of these pages and individuals, it's not working. ISIS is beating them in this game. That's just my opinion, but I absolutely agree that when it comes to things like Syria, and you know, if this was all censored, we wouldn't know a single thing. So I definitely support that.
It's a fine line. I think I'm oversimplifying it, but there is definitely an argument in, you know, just be quiet. Track it, be quiet, don't report. Unless they're doing some crazy stuff. But you know, everything has its own kind of situation. What do you think is next for the Tiger Forces? Do you think we'll see them taking part in the Idlib operation if that you know goes ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. They'll be a part of the Idlib operation. The bulk of their units have already moved up there. So I think, I mean, just kind of guessing right now, but if this really does go down, where you have the three main axes in North Hama, Latakia and Aleppo. We'll mostly see them in the North Hama area, since that's where they're really the core of their recruitment is. I mean, all of those villages along the North Hama border are heavy Tiger Force recruitment areas. You'll have like specific groups made entirely from that village. So yeah, I think they'll definitely be a part of that. It'll be interesting, if Russia does get involved in the offensive or not, how that would affect the Tiger Force's involvement. I could definitely see Russia, if Russia says we're not going to use our air power to support this offensive, if that's the deal they make with Turkey, it'd be interesting to see if they still have people on the ground and artillery support for the Tiger Forces, since that's been a very common thing. I mean, if you look back on East Ghouta offensive, in March, the Russian spokesman for the Russian military in Syria said, we will provide whatever air power Suhail needs to support him. I mean, they weren't saying we'll provide whatever air power for the regime forces. It's for Suhail.
So they're addressing him that blatantly, like directly.
Yeah. They work through him. He is their partner force. I mean, it's a very interesting dynamic for if Russia does back down a little bit from Idlib, what that means for their support to the Tiger Forces in Idlib.
Is that just because the SSA, the Syrian Arab Army, the regime forces, is that because they're so decimated and ruined and all over the place, like most of their tanks are wrecked now? Or is it because it's for Syria or the regime to go, oh, nothing to do with us, that was a militia, that wasn't us, that wasn't directly our forces, or do they not even care?
No, I think it's more the first one. The SAA, there's no division. There's no divisions left. They're a handful of half strength brigades, half strength battalions. They operate at the brigade level for the most part now. And even when you look at the Republican Guard, which is when it comes to Syria, it's a formidable fighting force. They just operate at the battalion level. They don't operate at the brigade level like they used to, because when we go back to 2011, 2012, and we mentioned that these core loyalist units were split apart and be attached to conscript SAA units to make sure they didn't defect. So the Republican Guard was split, you'd have battalions split off of their brigades, and they would go and sent to a front line attached to some SAA brigade. Those battalions don't have brigade affiliations anymore. Like when we look at Damascus, there's I think between 7 and 11 Republican Guard battalions that have been operating in Damascus for the whole war, that I can't find a single reference to their brigade affiliation. They're all basically independent battalions now. So when you're Russia coming into Syria, you're not going to start working through a disjointed, bunch of battalions when you can just go to the semi-centralized Tiger Forces. You've got a brigade or two, and you can work through them.
With that in mind, do you think it's then correct to say that perhaps the Tiger Forces are the only kind of cohesive regime force left now? They've basically taken the role of the army.
Yeah, they've taken the offensive role of the army. Yes, they're not the army. They're not manning the checkpoints everywhere and doing defensive stuff like the army is to a certain extent. They are in Hama. They do a lot. I mean, they can basically control all the black market in Hama, but they're the offensive unit now. But again, to me, it's really important that the distinction is made that they're not the offensive unit because there's some amazing commanders or amazing fighters. It's because of their size, their relative cohesiveness, and the support they both had with the Russians, and prior to the Russians, the support they had of the Air Force.
That is interesting. It's a weird situation where the militia kind of becomes the military, really.
Yeah, and so a lot of people are kind of, it's what happens to Suhail once this war is over.
Well, that's what I was going to say. What happens to the Tiger Forces when the war is over? Because, it is going to be over, I don't know, within the next 2 or 3 years. I reckon, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but, it seems to be coming to the tail end of it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, one place we could look to for an answer is what happened to Islam Zahruddin, the Republican Guard, hero of Deir ez-Zor, right? As soon as Deir ez-Zor was liberated, he died in a mysterious landmine accident. So,
of course he did. Well, I was going to say, this is going to sound like a weird parallel now, and I may be an idiot for saying this, but If you look at the Donbass, East Ukraine, you got the Russian-backed separatists. All of their key separatist commanders, Givy, Motorola, and now Alexander Zakharchenko, the leader of the DNR, have all died in the last 2 years in very mysterious circumstances. Now, the Russians just say, oh, yeah, it was Ukraine, and it wasn't. I did quite a bit of work, actually. I didn't publish my findings in the end, but, Givy, for definite, was not killed by Ukraine, almost for definite. Even the RPO, the weapon used was proliferated throughout all of the kind of separatist forces in that area. It was quite obvious what happened. Do you think it's possible that the Russians might just go, okay, those guys are gone now, because they've done a lot of work with them and they might want to cover that up in the future?
I wouldn't rule anything off the table. The one thing that is, I think, a little different about Suhail is, by all accounts, he's not entirely there mentally. If you listen, if you have fluent Arabic speakers listen to his speeches, he's not really coherent in what he says.
In what way? He's war damaged, or he's just not very clever?
Yeah, well, because that 2015 wound was, I think it was a mortar attack, and it was shrapnel to his face, into his head. So, and that's where the question of how much is he really in command here? Is he just a figurehead that when he shows up on the front lines, all the fighters are just oh, we can do this now, Suhail's here, which is, it's a valid, he's a valid moral boost to them. But is the strategy and the command really run by the Russians and his officer corps? I think it is more than it isn't. So it's not clear that he would actually be any sort of threat to Assad or to the Russians or to anybody. He could, instead of being assassinated, just get a nice little retirement. Who knows? A little forced retirement.
Yeah, that's a good point, because Givy and Motorola, these separatist commanders, were very much a threat. They'd even said, I think Motorola said recently before, or just before his death, I think he said something like, if you guys don't do what we're saying, then I'll just break away. I'll use my battalion to do whatever. So there's no signs, I guess, of the Tiger forces doing that.
Yeah, at least not from Suhail, I wouldn't say. And this is all speculation, but I think absolutely there's going to be issues with how do you demobilize the groups and bring Hama, especially Hama, but also parts of Homs, the Tal Kalak region of Homs, and parts of Latakia and Tartus back under government control, when you have just pretty much the entire western half of the Hama governorate and the northwest of Homs government is just Tiger forces. All of the villages there are heavy recruitment pools for major Tiger Force groups. So when the war is over, these guys are still going to want to make money. They have all the arms. They have the connection to the air intel. They can do whatever they want. How do you demobilize that? And how do you end basically what's going to become criminal gangs from having free reign in this really important region of the country?
Yeah, definitely one to watch out for. Greg, is there anything else you want to say? I think that's great. I think we got it.
No, I think it's just it's a really fascinating group, and I'm going to have a report out on it in a week or so, or a couple weeks, that will have a detailed breakdown of all of the groups and subgroups and where they're from and everything. So,
with that being said, where can people see your work? Where can they get hold of you?
So they can see a lot of my work on Twitter at Gregory P. Waters. And then I also write for the International Review, so that's international-review.org. That's where I've been publishing my Tiger Forces series. Do a lot of battle analysis on there, and various articles on local dynamics in Syria. Almost all based on Facebook, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. International Review. Who runs that again? The guy.
It's a group of us. Marcus, Adam, myself, Trent. So it's
Yeah, I've been on it a while. It's a really good site. People should definitely check that out. I forget who it is. One of your guys. Me and him have heated political arguments quite often in the Kurdish chat. But he's a really good lad, and I really like the site. What you guys are doing, man.
Oh, that's great. I appreciate that. It's a really fun project. So hoping that people keep going to it.
Okay, man. And what is that site? One last time.
It's the international-review.org.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Greg.
Thanks, Jake.
Cheers, mate. That was Gregory Waters talking about the Tiger forces of Syria laying waste to the areas they go to and fawning over their leader. This episode was sponsored by thedefensepost.com, defense with an S. Check them out. It's a really good website. To support Popular Front, to keep us going, to join the community, go to patreon.com/popularfront. You can get bonus episodes, narrated articles, all sorts of stuff there. Thank you very much to the people already supporting. You're helping me keep this going. Thank you very much to the higher tier Patreons. They are Teddy, Aliame Leroy, Emily Molly, Cedar Fenn, Daniel Shearer, Joanne Stocker, Margaret Bowling, Zachary Hinch, Stephen Adi Henderson, LH, Joel Tambusi, Cole Gannon, Ryan Sandercock, and Peter McCormack. Thank you very much. Like I said, if you want to support Popular Front, go to patreon.com/popularfront. To keep up to date with Popular Front, follow me on Twitter. That is Jake_Hanrahan, HANRAHAN. Or follow the Popular Front Twitter. That is @PopularFrontCO, like the site. To see all the episodes and to do one-time donations or Bitcoin donations, go to popularfront.co. When the Patreon hits a certain goal, I plan to use that money to build a website. So Popular Front will become more than just the podcast and the YouTube and that here and there. It will be kind of a hub, I hope, for independent conflict journalism. We're also on the Instagram now, so follow us there @popular.front. That's the best place to keep up to date with what we're going to be doing soon, which is we're going to be opening a Popular Front shop selling merchandise. We're going to be doing camouflage, tote bags, t-shirts, stickers, patches, all sorts of stuff. That will be opening within the next month or two, I would say. Music in this episode, the intro was by the synth artist Home, and the outro was by Son of Old. He just told me that he's updated his SoundCloud, so go there to see his latest material. That is soundcloud.com/son-of-old. Oh, and if anyone is still listening, I really need some help with graphic design. So if there are any graphic designers out there who would volunteer to help us make a few things for Popular Front, please do get in contact with me. Either send me a direct message on Twitter or email me. It's probably better to email me, but it's up to you. Email popularfrontpodcast@gmail.com. Cheers.